to the chat room. All right, people are coming in. Sorry about that. I'm trying to figure out the best way to operate a cooking demonstration in my parents' home, which is not easy to do. So I apologize if there's background noise or if my mom is walking through the background. But we are going to be doing a demonstration about how to be plant-based in as many areas of our cooking as we can, specifically also with things that we are growing, and how to be zero waste in the process. So I know we're gonna just give it a couple more minutes for some people to enter in, but as always, if you have questions, please throw them in the chat. We're gonna be making some interesting, fun things today, showing how we can utilize different crops and veggies within our backyards, our local farmers markets, what's in season, what's local, and we're going to make some delicious things for both dinner and dessert. So I don't know if people are struggling to get into the chat here, or not the chat, but into the live stream, but we'll give it a few more minutes, just because I know we got to prep a few things here. But in the meantime, I'm gonna just make sure that I have all of my stuff organized, and then we will get going in a second. So bear with me for a few minutes here while I just center this up. Got the camera there, which is good. And then everything else should be a-okay. Put those there for later. All right, so what time we got? Hold on, what time is it? It is 3:03, a couple more minutes here. I'm not sure how many of you are plant-based yourselves, but this is something that I made the switch about, I want to say 2 years ago, to the point, how did it go with the big I already see questions about that, but we're not gonna get that yet. We'll talk about that soon. But plant-based, right? I started 2 years ago, and it was, a gradual transition for me, doing more vegetarian meals, doing more vegan meals, now transitioned to a full-time vegan, and, being able to grow my own food certainly helps with a lot of that. So I can definitely say that it's it's not easy, but it's easier than people think. So today we're just going to go through some of the easy, really simple, no-fail recipes that we can start with just to create your own sort of plant-based transition. Because even if we are eating meat, we can eat less meat, both from an environmental standpoint and a health standpoint. It's obviously very beneficial. I don't want to get into the animal cruelty stuff because we're not here to talk about that, but it's there, it exists, we shouldn't ignore it. But either way, today we're going to be making and starting off with a zero waste homegrown pesto. And to make that, you need a couple different things, but essentially a pesto can be anything. Most often it's going to be based with basil, which we are going to use, but you want to throw in other things as well. That's totally fine. We're going to be throwing in basically what I call your refrigerator pesto. So anything that's left over in the fridge, something that might be wilted, something that might be, maybe not at its 100% peak, we're going to use that for our pesto because we don't want food waste. No matter what we're doing, we're going to be composting as much as we can and making sure that there is no food waste involved in anything that we're doing. So with that in mind, we have a couple ingredients here that we're going to start with. So we talked about pesto being something that is basil based, but you can also throw in things like spinach, something that's going to give it a little bit more nutrition, going to carry that pesto a little bit farther than if you're just using your basil plant. Because if you are just using your basil plant, the amount of basil needed to make a lot of pesto is challenging. It's not easy to fully take that on and say, hey, I'm going to take my whole plant and boom, it's gone. Now I don't have any basil for the rest of my dishes, right? So we have some spinach here. We're actually going to go pick some basil in a minute, but we're going to talk about some of the other ingredients that we have as well. The next thing we're going to have are our beets. Now, beets you wouldn't normally think about in a pesto, and we're not actually going to be using the traditional red beet in the pesto. That would give it a kind of off colored. It wouldn't exactly be a true pesto in that way. But what we are going to use are these greens. So, most people think of the beet, they only eat this part, but the greens are perfectly edible. And it's very similar in the same family as kind of like the Swiss chards. And if you look at the stalks, which are very celery-like and stringy, you can kind of see that there. These stalks are also edible, and we're going to use each part of the beet in this different recipe. They're going to be used for the dessert recipe more so, but for our purposes right now, we are sticking with the greens. So we have our spinach, we have our beet greens, we have our lemon. Lemons are essential. I love using as much lemon as possible. It's not, you don't have to use lemon in pesto, but I think it gives it such a nice sweet tang to it and gives a nice kick of acidity, which is always fun to add in. So lemons will be used. Pine nuts are traditional when it comes to pesto, and they add a little bit of protein. I'm going to be using walnuts. I think it gives a little bit more of a, a little bit stronger of a flavor. And these are also super high in protein, so that's another thing I get questions about all the time. It's like, how do you maintain your fitness? How do you maintain your protein intake? I eat a ton of nuts, a ton of beans, a ton of legumes, all of that, and we can certainly get into questions about sort of the nutrition physical side as well. But we have our spinach, we have our beet greens, we have our lemons, we have our walnuts. Probably the most important ingredient aside from the basil is your extra virgin olive oil. You cannot have a pesto without olive oil. And olive oil is going to add a few things. Number one, it's going to add a nice kick of flavor. Number two, it's going to allow that pesto to not be as chunky. You don't want your pesto to be completely liquid based, but you don't want it to be filled with different particles that are kind of bigger and harder to chew, right? So we're going to go with some of our extra virgin olive oil, and you're going to add that in sort of as you see fit, just to increase the right texture you're going for. Traditionally, you're going to see pesto being done with garlic. I love garlic, but honestly, I get tired of it, so I use shallots. Shallots are kind of this in-between weird root vegetable that are kind of like a cross between an onion and a bulb of garlic, right? And it's a little bit reddish hue here, and it's got a nice purple center, and it's got a little bit more sweetness to it. So I'm going to be using this in my pesto as well, and then maybe we'll throw in a couple other things here and there, salt, pepper, the usual things. But before we get into that, we actually have to go get our basil. So we're going to be harvesting that from my own room. So I'm going to take my kitchen shears, and we are going to make our way over. So hold on, we're going to go on a little adventure here. So we are making our way through the living room, through the kitchen. Hold on, we're losing control, but that's okay. Here we go. And now we are in the bedroom. And here, let me tilt the camera down, we have the germination station, which is serving as a germination station and a grow station right now. I've got some kale seedlings, which I would put in the pesto eventually when they get bigger, right? But these are just babies right now, just germinated a couple days ago. And I've got my squash, I got my cucumbers. For those that were in class, they've seen this already the past couple weeks, but here is the basil, and it probably needs a good, actually I just watered it, but it's been a little wilty lately because I hadn't watered it enough. But we're gonna take a few stalks of this basil, and there's a method to cutting it and pruning this. So most people will they'll come on here and they'll grab some of the basil by the leaf and they'll pull that off and think that that's great. But what that does is it actually prevents the plant from becoming bushier. So what you would really want to do is you want to cut in between these nodes here. So these are the leaves, right? Coming out on both sides. If you cut between here, you're gonna see growth coming out from the bottom, and it's gonna create a bushier plant that's gonna produce more. So if I'm coming in here, I'm cutting, I wanna cut right here. Can we see that? Yeah, here we go. So I'm cutting right there. Oop, I missed it. Boom, there's one. I'm gonna cut in here. Here's the second one. Hold on, I missed it. It's kind of hard to hold the camera and do it with one hand, but no shame. I'm coming in here. We are cutting everything that we can. Here's the last one. Boom. All right, so we have our basil. Basil is ready to go. Now let's make our way back into the kitchen, and we're gonna take this basil and we're gonna start making our pesto. So hold on one second. My camera is very funky. I don't know how to use my tripod well enough, but we're gonna set this up again. Hold on. Here we go. And Bang, we are back. Okay, so to be fair, this is not enough basil for what we would probably need if we were making a ton of pesto. This is probably more of a spinach pesto than anything else, but we are going to go with it anyway. So I'm going to take this basil, which, I mean, I probably should wash it, but it's been in there for a while and I don't use any pesticides. It's not dirty. I'm going to be fine with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pinch off all the leaves first and I'm going to throw them in here. And we're still going to use the stalks because the stalks are they still have flavor and it's getting blended up anyway. But you don't have to use the stalks if you don't want to. It's going to create maybe a little bit more, I don't want to call it grittiness, but it's certainly going to have more texture to it. I'm just going to chop them up a little smaller just so that it's easier for, everything to kind of get mixed in together. So once I have that, I'm going to toss those in. There is my basil. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing with the spinach. Now, how much spinach you put in here is up to you, but again, I'm taking these stalks and I'm going to leave the stalks out for now. There's a couple things I can do with the stalks similar to the basil stalks. I can throw them in there right now, or what I could do is actually take them and saute them. People don't think to separate the stalks first, they think to just cook it all at the same time, but the stalks will actually cook at a little slower pace than the leafy greens. The leafy greens really don't need to be cooked much at all. You can really just, sort of wilt them and heat them up in your microwave even if you wanted. So either way, we are taking our stalks off. We're going to put them in here. I'm going to use the stalks later. But if you didn't want to use the stalks, what I would make sure you do is start composting. Now, I get a lot of questions about what composting is, what it isn't, how to do it if you're living in a city. It can be kind of complex, right? Because there's a lot of hoops that you might have to go through if you're living in an apartment to actually compost. Now, compost at its core is basically just taking organic material. I'm taking organic material in this instance from food that I'm cooking, but you can also do it if you have a backyard. That would be considered your brown compost versus your green compost, which is your food waste. And we are going to turn that and pile it into a very condensed, hot kind of enclosure so that that can become rich soil. Now, it's not fully soil, right? You can't just grow in compost, but that compost is full. Sorry, we're getting a delivery here. But that compost is full of organic material. And this organic material is going to be what's used to sustain your garden. Each year in the spring, I will take the compost that's from my garden, or I might even buy compost. Espoma is another company that will send me some compost. I love their mix. But I'll take that compost, I'm going to spread about 2 inches of it into the soil, and I'm just going to get that going, right? That's like, restocking the grocery store for the soil. If the grocery store is full, the plants are going to have plenty of nutrients that they can use to really get going in their growth cycle, right? All right, so now I've got the majority of my spinach in here. We're filling up a little bit, and this is probably going to take me, I probably should put the heavier stuff on the bottom. When we shake it up, it's going to be more challenging to get going, but we have our blender here, our NutriBullet, which is certainly going to help. So now I have my shallot, and the shallot you can cut up, you don't have to cut it up crazy small. This part is actually a little bit rotted, a little mushy, so I'm going to throw that in my compost holder. Now this is useful to have. I keep a, I don't want to call this like a soup can or a soup plastic container, but I keep this on hand at all times when I'm cooking. I'll literally leave it out on the table, leave it out on the countertop, and anytime I'm cooking lunch, dinner, whatever it is, I'm going to make sure that this is available so that anytime I have food waste, I can toss it in here, and then at the end of the day, I can throw it into my compost. Now, if you are in the city and you are thinking about composting, there's a couple ways to do it. When I lived in the city very recently, the easiest way for me was to actually take a brown paper bag and fill up all my compost and put it in the freezer. If I put it in the freezer, it doesn't smell, it's out of sight, and then I would take it to Union Square Farmers Market, which is just at Union Square in New York, and there's a spot where you can actually drop off your compost. Now, if your city or your area doesn't have a spot like that, it's a little bit trickier. You might have to find a local area that does accept compost from your neighborhood, but in general, there's a lot of resources available to you. I know some areas of New York, you can actually get a brown bin, which you can put outside your apartment or your brownstone. You see them more in Brooklyn, I've noticed. but you can actually use that as well for your composting. So it's something that is a constant battle, and I know in New York also there's been talks, not even sure if they've done it yet, but of eliminating the compost program during COVID, just because it's an extra expense, and the mayor's trying to figure out ways to cut costs here and there, but I think people are really adamant about maintaining that if they can. So anyway, now I am taking my beet greens, I'm adding these into the mix, and this is getting a little bit too full, so we're gonna have to start blending pretty soon. But I'm throwing these in here just to demonstrate how we're gonna do this. And if we have to give it a couple tries through the NutriBullet, so be it. Usually I end up overstuffing a lot of the things that are going in here anyway. But the next thing I'm gonna add is my liquid, and the liquid is going to help me make sure that this stays the right consistency, and it's also gonna make it easier to blend, and I'm being very generous with my olive oil. I love olive oil, I'm Greek. This is just, it's part of the process, right? Next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add in my lemon. The lemons are, up to you on how you wanna flavor it. I'm gonna start with half a lemon and just see sort of how it tastes at the end of it, just to make sure that it's got the right acidity that I'm looking for. Throw that in here. All right. So some of you might be wondering, if you've had pesto in the past, hey, doesn't pesto have cheese? I thought there's Parmesan and other cheeses that go into it that really give it that kind of like great, gooey kind of texture. And you are right. There's certainly cheese that would go in a traditional pesto, but this is a vegan pesto. So instead of cheese, I would be using nutritional yeast, which is, if any of you are familiar, it's something that a lot of vegans use to not only supplement their nutrition, because it's got lots of great vitamins and nutrients, but also it would allow them to create different dishes that would call for cheese. It's got an interesting consistency, it's kind of flaky, but when you mix it with water or liquids, it can actually come out to be a really nice kind of gooey, cheesy texture. So I'm gonna take this, I'm gonna make sure that this goes in my compost. But another actually really good tip from my friend Max Lamana, who is a awesome zero waste vegan chef, is you can actually take those lemon rinds or citrus rinds and actually make home cleaners out of them. So if you put them in a vinegar solution and leave them out overnight, you can actually use that to be an organic cleaner. It's pretty multi-surface, so you can use it on wood, you can use it on glass, whatever it might be. You can actually create your own cleaners as opposed to, going to the store and buying something in plastic. Now, is it 100% antibacterial? No. So in this case, you probably want to stick with something that is going to guarantee you're getting rid of every single germ in your path, right? But either way, a good tip for just cleaning general surfaces. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add in my walnuts. And the walnuts go in here just to add that nuttiness, that protein. It's going to be delicious. So the next step is to just blend it up, and we're gonna see kind of what consistency we get. So I've got my NutriBullet here, so we're going to screw on the top, and this may take a few tries, and bear with me when the noise starts kicking in because it's gonna be a little noisy, but hold on, we're gonna see how we do here. And there we go. So that requires more shaking and just breaking it up. I'm gonna add some more olive oil in here just to make sure that I can have the right amount of liquid, and it seems like I need a bunch more, so I'm gonna be very generous here, tossing that in. And if anyone has questions, Nick, quarantine haircut, don't get me started with the haircut. This was not something I envisioned when I started the process of shaving my head, but when you're stubborn and think you can do it yourself and you don't ask your mom for help, this is what happens. You end up with a shaved head, but could have been worse. I actually thought I did a decent job on the sides, but then it got to the top and it was a big old thing. So, I've learned my lesson. And now we're sending it through the blender again. Come on. This is getting a little stuck. And ideally, what you probably want to use instead of a NutriBullet is a actual food processor. Food processors are a little bit easier to use because it's not as vertical, so you don't have to worry about, hold on, let me just mix this up in here. You don't have to worry about it getting some of the stuff getting stuck on the top versus the bottom. And it makes it really easy to clean as well. The NutriBullet is something I just use at home. I didn't actually have room in my apartment for a food processor, and I figure most people, especially if they're new to cooking, probably don't have a food processor at home, but they probably have a smoothie maker. So I'm going to add in a little bit more olive oil. I might add a little more onion, or not onion, a little more lemon as well. So I'm going to toss this in here, and I'm going to cut this up. Okay. And I see someone had originally asked, how did it go on the big flower fight? So for those that don't know, the big flower fight is actually an upcoming television show on Netflix coming out May 18th, which is a green sculpture flower plant green creation competition. It's a very new kind of process, new show for sure. It's a competition show started by the same folks who did the Great British Bake Off. Same production company, same everything, really high-class group. And I was one of the contestants. I flew out to England this past summer and spent a certain amount of time. I can't tell you how much time I was out there, but it was amazing, to be able to get out there and test a different artistic side of myself from a plant standpoint. It's not oftentimes that a client will ask for, make me a 12-foot green monkey out of chicken wire and grasses, right? So, these are kind of like some of the competitions that you'll see on the show. You definitely should watch it. It's going to be probably something like you've never seen before. It's going to be very different than some of the things that we traditionally see on Netflix, and it's certainly the first foray into the plant world for them. So tune in May 18th. All right, there we go. Making some progress here. I just need to stir it up a little bit more. I'm going to grab a spoon just to make it a little bit easier. And if you are struggling with something like this, a good tip to also say is you can also add water. Reason why you might want to add water is because water is not going to really drastically change the flavor, but if you use too much oil, it can really overpower your pesto. So I'm going to add a hint of water in here just to help it really get going. 2 drops in there. Stir it up a little bit more, and then we will get this going. And it already smells so good. And honestly, I'm growing spinach right now. It wasn't ready for harvest for today. But when you have something that you pick that day, be it basil or spinach or whatever that you're cooking, it makes such a difference, right? Both in the smell, the flavor, the satisfaction, knowing that you grew this yourself, right? There's so much that goes into it. But it's a really nice feeling to be able to go into your bedroom or into your backyard, pick something, and then start growing it. So we're getting there on texture. Here we go. Come on. So, shake it up a little bit more, and I'll show you kind of what the proper consistency, if I can even get it off, because my hands are getting oily. Come on. Ah! See, this is why I'm a plant guy and not a home chef, because the home chefs would have known exactly how to take care of everything in advance. But hey, we're working on it. We're living our best plant-based life, and ooh, here we go. That looks awesome. You see that green color? It's probably a little thicker than I'd want, so I still might want to add some more liquid to it, either olive oil, lemon juice, or whatever it might be. But it is so good. It is really good. And I'll put pesto on anything. It can be used as a dip for parties. It can be used on pasta. Oftentimes I'll throw it over sweet potato noodles or zoodles, which are just made of zucchini. But this is what you want to see, right? You want to see that awesome green color. I'll probably amend this later just to make sure that I can get in, the right consistency for dinner tonight. But we have other things that we need to be cooking. So someone said it looks yummy. Great, that is good. That is what I want to hear. But it's not just about dinner, we also want dessert. And how we go about making dessert in a vegan way, people get very confused. They say, wait, but what about eggs? What about milk? How am I gonna make something super delicious? But let me tell you, sugar is still vegan. I don't eat a ton of it, but when I do, I wanna do it the right way. So we are going to actually switch over here and say, how are we going to make a vegan crumble? Now, this isn't just any crumble, right? And a crumble is basically just, at its core, it's going to be, some kind of fruit, which is going to be baked, and over the top or mixed inside of it, it's going to be some kind of, I don't want to call it a crust, but some kind of oat covering or something that is going to give it a little bit of crunch, something a little bit sugary, something to break up some of that softer texture that almost feels like pie filling. So this crumble is what I call the zero waste, empty the refrigerator crumble, which is basically taking all of the fruit that is kind of mushy or bruised, stuff that you might not want to eat just by itself. We're gonna throw it in here and we're gonna make ourselves a crumble. But before that, I see any questions. Do you add salt to your pesto? Yes, I will add salt to my pesto. I usually wait till the end just to get that in there. But good question. I will add salt. I will add some pepper. Just sort of season to taste. But that will be just dependent on sort of what your preferences are there. But either way, not too much. The lemon juice, I feel, will add a lot of that sort of kick that you need, but you definitely should add some salt because it does make a big difference. So, but we're going sweet now, so I want to make sure we can get in this. Hold on. I have to just take care of that real quick. All right, great. Oh, that's so good. And it's basically you're eating a salad and it just doesn't taste like a salad, right? Because it's got all those other flavors. And the nuts also give it a little bit of that umami flavor, which is just that kind of, I don't want to say it resembles meat by any means, but it's a word that it's going to be more sort of describing sort of the satisfactory kind of feeling, that fullness feeling. You also get it from mushrooms and from tomatoes as well. But we're going sweet now, so we want to make sure that we have all of our sweet things ready to go. So remember our beets. We talked about our beets. I'm not going to bake these up and cook them because it's going to take too long for that, but you can throw these in your crumble. I could break these up and I could throw them in there. The thing that is about the beets is that they take longer to cook than some of the other things I'm going to be throwing in here. So I have some old mushy strawberries from the fridge. The same thing, I've got some old mushy blackberries. I've got some apples. The apples are actually fine. This one's a little bit bruised up on the side. And then I've got another red apple in a similar position. So these are basically all foods that I just pulled out of my fridge that I could just throw into any crumble at any time and it's going to taste delicious. Now, the beets compared to those are gonna take a little bit longer to cook, so I might not mix them together. I've done it before and it sometimes works fine, but I'm gonna keep them out of this recipe for now because some of us are very intimidated by beets, and rightfully so. They have a little bit more of an earthy flavor to them and aren't as sweet as some people might think. Depends on your beets though, depends on where you're getting them. But fun fact, getting any kind of root vegetable from a cold weather climate and a cold season is actually preferred. The reason being is when it gets cold, like it actually is going to be almost dropping to freezing in the middle of May and the next couple days, which is depressing for my garden. But when it gets cold, the plants actually start taking in more sugars into the roots. In this case, for root vegetables, those sugars are going to almost act like antifreeze. And when that happens, if you pick them, then you're going to see a higher sugar content than you normally would if you were to buy, say, a carrot from Mexico. If you're buying a carrot from Mexico, the temperature is never going to get very low, and those sugars are going to go other places and not the actual carrot. So always try and buy those vegetables in the cooler seasons. The same applies for some of the lettuces, your Brussels sprouts, anything that's sort of cool season is going to be higher in sugar content if you're getting it during those cooler temperatures anyway. But so we have our apples, we have our strawberries, we have our blackberries, we have our beet stems. Yes, our beet stems. So this I'm going to cut this up, I'm going to put this in the crumble. Why? Because it tastes delicious, you barely even notice it, and it's zero waste. These stems will probably go unused. You might even cut off the entire head of the beet, right? So instead of just using this, we're using the stems. We've already used our leafy greens in the pesto, and now we're ready to go. So I'm gonna cut these up. I've already washed them. I'm gonna cut them up pretty small. You know, I would say, you know, this is more of a dice, maybe a chop, I'm not sure. My mom and I debate the difference in size between the two, but either way, we're going for smaller pieces, maybe like, you know, 1/4 of an inch or so, 1/2 inch tops. So I'm gonna take these, I'm gonna put them in my bowl. I'm gonna throw them in here, ready to go. I'm gonna cut up these other beets as well, just so that I have them ready to go. And then we're going to start throwing in the other berries. Now the berries, honestly, like, do I need to cut up the blackberries? Probably not. So I'm just gonna throw those in here. I'm gonna pull out any of the, you know, the dry stuff or the leaves that may have gotten caught on them. I washed these already, so don't need to worry about that. Everything here has been pre-washed. And then I'm gonna cut up more of my beet stems. So I don't know how many of you use beets. I never used to like beets. Even when I watched The Office and I loved Dwight. Dwight was a beet farmer and I thought that was gross, but I've come to love them. They are fantastic, and I want to use as much of them as I can. There's so much of it that we don't use in our daily cooking, and I want to make sure that we can find ways to eliminate our food waste, and if we can't eliminate it at all, we want to make sure we find ways to compost it. I'm just going to separate these leafy green tops. I'm going to cut these off. And then I might add a few more of the beet stems just so that I can get a nice covering. And what I can do is I'm not putting these inside of the pesto because the pesto's already done. I'm gonna take these and I'm actually just gonna saute these up. Saute these up with a little olive oil, a little garlic. Oh, it's gonna be great. So I'll do that tonight. I'll put them here, leave them there for now. I'm gonna cut up the rest of my beet stems. Now, I probably shouldn't be doing this on a wooden cutting board just because the beet stems release a little bit of that liquid that can stain, but I'm gonna make sure that I give this a good washing real quick afterwards, just so that none of that really sinks into the wood. But I have my beets going in, and it's starting to look real pretty. I actually love this color combination right now with this light, or this dark magenta with the blackberries. Like, that looks awesome. But we have more things to add. So I'm gonna cut up my mushy strawberries, take the tops. I know people who eat the tops, and I'll chew around them because they're delicious. But for the most part, I'm gonna compost those. But I know people who certainly will not be shy about eating the entire thing, which is cool, whatever you wanna do. So I'm gonna cut these up, not huge pieces. Probably cut them into 4s, 5s, depending on how big the strawberry is. Throw them in there, and then I'll be ready to go. Now, this, we're getting it prepared for the crumble. This isn't going to go directly into the bottom. We want to make sure that we can sort of dress it with what we need. And what we dress it with is going to be sort of up to us, but I use a certain combination, which I'll show you briefly, or in a moment. But the key is to just make sure that you are giving it, you know, I don't want to say, you know, extra flavor, but you want those natural sugars to come out. There are some recipes which will tell you to add sugar right away into this dish right here, but I don't really do that. I know that the sugars from the fruit are going to come out, and it's going to taste delicious anyway, so I'm really not worried about adding any extra sugar here. If I was, I would probably use, you know, half of what they say. I try and use less sugar than the recipe calls for, no matter what, just to see how it comes out, because everyone's flavors and taste buds are different. I don't want to add too much sugar, and I want to let the natural sugar sort of play the role of the star in the dish. So I'm going to get my apples in here. Got to cut up one more. And having a good knife is essential, because it makes it go by really fast and also protects you. You don't want a dull knife. Dull knife is when the injuries happen, and we don't want any of those injuries. I recently learned, not recently, but actually I've been hearing about like this whole avocado finger, about people cutting up avocados and how it's like giving them nerve damage and causing major issues. Take these cores and compost them, but we don't want any issues when we are cooking in the kitchen. So sharp knives, invest in your knife set. That is really important. So as I get these apples in here, I'm going to toss them in, get this going, break them up, and then I'm going to dress these with a few simple things. The first thing I'm going to dress them with is lemon juice. You know, as much as I love the sweetness of all these sugars, I also want them to have a little bit of bite, a little bit of acidity, that sweet and sour flavor. Typically, I would be making this actually with rhubarb. Rhubarb is another one similar to Swiss chard, also kind of that leafy green, but the stalk is what you would use, and it's red and it's super tart. You wouldn't want to eat it if you just, you know, sort of were eating it uncooked, right? But strawberry rhubarb tarts and crumbles are very common. I'll oftentimes throw rhubarb into this to give it a little bit more tang. I just don't have any rhubarb on me. So I will not be using that for this dish, but you can throw literally anything you want in here. My family doesn't even like rhubarb, so they're gonna be pretty happy about this, especially for Mother's Day come Sunday when this is all set up. So I'm squeezing half a lemon in here, which is perfect. That ends my lemon. I can compost the rest. Oop, don't want any seeds in there. That would be bad. That would be not so good for the crumble. But we can solve the problem. There we go. That's out. So once the lemon's in, what then I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use a little bit of coconut oil. And the coconut oil is just to give it a little bit of flavor, kind of get it, you know, a little bit, I don't know if it heats it up necessarily, but a lot of recipes call for some kind of, you know, oil in there. And coconut oil I find is the best for sweet things. So I'm gonna take a little bit of that coconut oil, I'm gonna toss it in here, and I'm gonna take a different spoon to you know, mix it up because I don't want all my family getting my germs. So I'm gonna grab another spoon here, and I'm just gonna mix this up. Now this is the baseline of our crumble, right? This is what is going in here, and it is super colorful and delicious. You're basically making a fruit salad. This is a dessert fruit salad, which is so easy to make. I've already set my oven temperature, by the way, to 350 degrees. This is gonna sit in here for about 40 minutes or so, and you can eat it warm when it comes out, although honestly, like, I kinda like leaving it out at room temperature for a while, and you can even chill it. My mom has been throwing it in her plain yogurt in the mornings, instead of taking just like, you know, or buying those yogurts that have all the added sugar and the fruit at the bottom. This is your fruit at the bottom, right? So I've got this, and it looks delicious. I realized I left my pie tin in the kitchen. Let me go grab that. 1 second. Boom. All right, I'm back. Man, cooking shows are hard. I didn't think it would be this hard, but you gotta have a lot of stuff. But hey, we're working with it here. So we got a pie tin, probably about a couple inches thick. I'm gonna dump this in here, and we're gonna fill this up. I've gotten pretty good at guesstimating the height, and it's okay if it comes up a little bit, right? It doesn't have to be fully down into there, but we wanna just make sure that it's not totally overflowing. We just wanna make sure that it is nice and full. There we go. So now, what are we doing for our topping? Topping is really important, and this is where, you know, it gets a little bit more vegan, right? Because we don't want to use butter, we don't want to use eggs, we want to try and avoid those if we can. So we are going to add in a few different things into our crumble. So the first thing you want to start with are oats. Now, you'll see that all of the ingredients that I have and that I've been using are in these little mason jars. I did not buy these. I bought the original salsa or jelly jar, whatever it was that it came with, and then I found the right tops on Amazon. And this is a great way of making your pantry look alive. It's also a great way of reducing food waste. If I go into Fairway, or if I go into Whole Foods, or anywhere that has bulk items, I can take my mason jars with me, or if they don't allow mason jars or they weigh them and they're heavy, I'll take them in a bag like this, fill it up with bulk, transfer them in my mason jar, add them in my pantry. It looks amazing, cutting down on our plastic waste. It's a win across the board. So I got these oats in bulk. I'm gonna toss these in here, and I didn't measure per se exactly how much I need, but I know roughly because I've done this 1,000,001 times. So I'm gonna put in my oats. I'm gonna put in some flaxseed powder or flour, flaxseed powder, which gives it a little bit more of that kind of like baked feel. It's like flax meal. I forget the exact name, but it's made of flax seeds and it's delicious. And it gives it a little bit more stickiness in the consistency. So I'm gonna throw some of that in. The next thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go back to my walnuts, and I'm gonna also add in some almonds as well. Almonds are one of my favorite things to add into desserts. They kind of have, I don't want to say that they have a sweetness to them already. I actually like cashews the most, but I didn't have cashews on me for this. But you can take any kind of nut that you have. You're gonna give it a rough chop. You don't want it to be huge pieces in the crumble, right? You don't want it to stick out and be awkward for people eating it, right? I'm gonna give it a rough chop, coming across here. And then once that is in a good place, I will toss it into my crumble mix. Throw that in there. I don't mind if it's a bit chunky, but I don't want it to be huge full pieces, right? We want it to be easy to eat. Then I'm gonna throw in some almonds. Almonds are really easy to cut. They kind of crumble up already. So that's not so bad. So I'll take these, I'll cut these up. Really easy to. Excellent. A little more. Boom. So now I've got my oats. I have my almonds. I have my flax. At this point, I would add some sugar. I'll probably use some brown sugar, but I don't have to. Totally up to you. But the next thing that I'll do is I'm going to add the binding agent, the thing that's going to keep all of this together. And for that, I would typically want to use butter, but we're using vegan butter. And my favorite vegan butter in the world, it is Miyokos. I can never pronounce the name right, but I've been using this for a while and it is honestly fantastic. I don't taste the difference. It's higher in salt, I think, than some of the other butters, but it is unbelievable. Actually, it's really not that high in salt. I thought it was much higher, only 65 milligrams per tablespoon, so it's not so bad. But I'm gonna take this out and I'm gonna eyeball it just because, I wanna make sure that, I'm not gonna measure it, but I kinda know already what amount I need for this. And I've let this kind of sit out a little bit just so that it can loosen up and not be complete water. I want it to still have some stickiness to it. So I'm gonna drop those in there. And now this is where the fun part happens. So now, put my butter away. Come on, get in there. There we go. The butter is gone. And now I get to start playing with my hands. And this is, just my opportunity to feel kind of how the consistency is shaping out to be. I'm breaking up those bits of butter and I am making sure that every piece of the crumble, all those dry ingredients are kind of coming together and sticking together. Once they're stuck together, it's going to be easy for me to layer this over the crumble and get that fully coated. Hold on, let me just get it. Are there any questions here? Baked almonds. They're not baked almonds, these are raw almonds. You can use baked if you want, totally up to you. You can literally use any kind of nut in here. If you wanted to use peanuts, you could do that too. But I guess your almonds are going to become twice baked once you throw them into the oven. But I use raw for most things. I don't really buy the onions that are already, or not onions, the nuts that are already baked or anything like that. But totally up to you. So I'm going to just mix it in here. Make sure that it's not going to be totally loose, but you want it to have some ability to kind of stick together when pressed. So I'm just going through this, mixing this up, and I might want to add a little bit more butter. What you can also do is you don't want to add the butter, you can add a little bit more of the coconut oil. Coconut oil will have a similar kind of effect. Not as sticky as the butter, so up to you. But I'm going to throw that in there just to add a little bit more moisture. And now that's starting to feel really good. Really good. Okay, excellent. So now once this is in a good place and it smells, it just smells so good. I'm not going to add any sugar to this. It's totally optional for you. If I did add sugar, I'd probably use a 1/4 cup of brown sugar, just because that's, I prefer brown sugar anyway. It's got a little bit more clumpiness to it. But I'm going to throw this on top, and if people don't like the crumble because it doesn't have sugar, what they can do is they just mix it all together, so that instead of tasting the top on its own and then the sugary bottom, you kind of mix it all together, so the topping really just becomes integrated and crumbled inside, and then you should be good. So I'm gonna slowly move this over here. Now I've got my crumble on top, and now I'm just starting to top it off, right? So I'm gonna just move this over here so you can see, but I'm just gonna make sure that it covers kind of every area of the pan or the baking pie circle, whatever you wanna call it. The vessel for my dessert and my happiness in quarantine. I literally made this is probably like my 6th crumble, and they're all different every single time, which is great. I love it, but it's, of the desserts that you can possibly have, it's certainly not the worst one for you. And you're also limiting your food waste, right? So you're making it easy on yourself, you're making it easy on the environment, easy on your body. Your family's gonna love you. It's a crowd pleaser, for sure. And it's all vegan, which is even better. All right, so now that we've fully pressed that down, it's stuck together perfectly. Hold on, let me just shake this off so you can get a look at it here. And bam, look at that. That is a crumble, and you can see those berries on the bottom. That's gonna turn into this just delicious, saucy, kind of delicious, just sweet fruit flavor, almost like a pie filling. It basically is pie filling. And then we have this crumble on top, which is going to get nice kind of golden brown. We're gonna throw it in the oven 40 minutes, again at 350. And once this comes out, I'm just gonna let it sit out. I'm gonna have my pesto for dinner, throw it over some pasta, some zoodles, some sweet potato, whatever it is, and then I'm ready to go, right? This is an example of how we can just be a little bit more conscious about the food that's in our fridge, how to compost, how to use food differently, how to use every part of the food that we're making, because at the end of the day, we wanna try and lower our environmental impact in any way that we can, and it's not just about going to the climate change rallies or doing this or that, right? We gotta live it. And for that to happen, it needs to be these little micro step behaviors every single day. And cooking is something that we can all get better at, and something that we can certainly have a very significant impact on. So doesn't matter if you're vegan, doesn't matter if you have a plant-based meal once a month, try this out. In DM me, I'll send you all the recipes that you need. We'll send those over to you, but anytime you can have some fun in the kitchen, try some new ingredients, explore a little bit, get creative with your food waste, or limiting your food waste rather, it's always gonna be a win. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions about anything, plants, food, gardening, whatever it might be, questions for me, the big flower fight, whatever you wanna talk about, because I know we got just a couple more minutes here. But if not, then we'll sign off and have a great weekend. But throw them in the chat if you have them. And as always, if you have other questions that you wanted to address or get answered, throw me a DM. I'll try and get to all of the DMs that come my way, but lately it's been very busy with everyone at home who is actively growing their own food and gardening differently, or for the first time for some people. So yeah, it's been an interesting quarantine, but when you have good food and a backyard and able to grow some things on your own and bake delicious crumbles every now and then, it is not so bad. But it looks like there are no questions here, so I guess we'll wrap up. But yeah, thank you again to Pildora. This is, as I've said before, this is, a joy for me to be able to come on here and share some of the things that are helping me live my best plant-based life. It's not just about the houseplants, it's not just about the garden, it's about, every facet of your life, right? Eating, the environment, the houseplants you have, getting outside, supporting the right values, right? So if you have more questions about that, definitely let me know. I also just launched a newsletter called the Growing Green newsletter, which is going to cover different topics and role models and learnings that I've used on my journey in living this kind of plant adjacent life as much as I can. I'm basically trying to become 100% plant in everything that I do. So definitely subscribe to that. The link's in the bio. But yet again, thank you to Pildora for offering me this platform and being able to interact with you all. I'm having a ton of fun with it, and I hope to see you soon. So with that, Farmer Nick is signing off, and hope you have a wonderful and green weekend.
If you enjoyed that video and want to watch it live, head to www.pildoralive.com to get your free membership today and join us in daily live classes surrounding sustainability, mindfulness, and positive environmental impact. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Thanks so much for tuning in. Have a beautiful day. Bye.